Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this live stream event. My name is Alexia, and I am the program manager of the Microsoft Reactor Toronto. I will be sharing session resources with you in the chat. But before we begin, I'd like to quickly review two items: our code of conduct and event guidelines. First, please take a moment to review our code of conduct. Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. And secondly, our event guidelines. This session is being recorded and will be available on demand through the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. I will be sharing the link in the chat for our on-demand content. And if you have not been on a live stream through YouTube before, please note that you must create an account on YouTube in order to have access and interact in the chat. You can set that up now, and if you're unable to use the chat but have questions, feel free to reach out to us through social media or on our website. Which brings us to today's session. I'm going to bring in our speaker here for today, Ricardo. Hi, Ricardo.
Hello.
It is so great to have you here for your first session with the Reactor. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm super excited about it. And it's gonna
Fantastic.
be a lot of fun. Let's do it.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Well, take it away. Thank you so much.
All right. So today we're gonna be talking about unlocking the large language model potential, a journey with APIs. We're gonna gradually start going through the development of a ChatGPT-like assistant, and we're going to introduce our APIs to it. It's kind of like an augmentation, but it also allows you to do actions. So we're going to see all of that. My name is Ricardo Covo. I'm a principal consultant on app dev and modernization for CenturyLogic. I've also been an engineer manager and agile coach. You can see all about myself in LinkedIn. That's my main social media outlet. So without further ado, let's see what we are going to be talking about. So in the agenda today, first I'm going to give you an overview of the environment, the services that we're going to use. This is going to be a very demo heavy presentation. Then we're going to go into the basics of what a ChatGPT assistant looks like in a Blazor C# configuration. And then we're going to introduce the tools, which is where we're going to work with our functions and APIs. Finally, I'm going to give you an assistant overview. Assistants are on preview, and I didn't have it available until very, very recently, so I don't have a full demo of it, but I can tell you the highlights, and we can navigate in the portal about that. All right, so in the environments, I'm going to show you three things. The Azure OpenAI configuration that I have, a web API, a sample web API that I created for this project, and then my Visual Studio project. So let's go directly into that. So what I have on my Azure subscription is an Azure OpenAI instance. This is hosted in AWS, and basically you create it on the portal, but when you're going to work on it, you go into the Azure OpenAI Studio. And what I'm showing you here is that I have one deployment of ChatGPT 3.35. That's more than enough for this demo. And when you go into it, you can see some of the configurations that you have for it. If you go back into the resource in in Azure, I think I lost my. You can see here uh, important information that we're going to be using. This is going to be our endpoint, and you're going to be able to connect to it, you're going to need an endpoint, a key, and then the deployment name, which I very originally called GPT-3.5. Right, so that's the Azure OpenAI instance that I have. Then on the project, on the web API that I created for this project, so I was inspired by a colleague of mine that created a an assistant for helping us set up our timesheets. So he created this thing where you can, in natural language, tell the assistant to add times to projects, to list your projects, and things like that. It created a very easy scenario for us to manage our timesheets. And I wanted to demo how you can do that. So in our API, I have basically three functions or three endpoints. The first one gives me all the active projects. So it will give me something like this. Oh, this is running on container apps, and I recently restarted it so we can start fresh. But basically, I have three projects, and then when it's time to um, add hours to a project, you have a URL where you have the ID on the URL, and then the post data looks a little bit like this. You have a user ID, entry date, and hours, in a description, of course. So through our demo, we're going to get to a point that we're going to be calling this API. And the third thing that I wanted to show you is my Blazor app. It's a very simple Blazor app out of the template. Uh, on the application settings, I have set up my endpoint, my API key, and also the timesheets API URL that we will see later on. This particular code, all this code you can find in the following repository, Ricardo Cobo Azure AI function calling. And there's three branches. Each branch represents an increment in functionality. So we're going to start with the main one, which is the basic chat. Then we're going to introduce a local function calling, and finally an API function call. Just be aware there is not a lot of documentation on it. I will add that eventually. All right, so those are the things that you need to know. Let's continue with the presentation for a second. Some basics that will make your understanding a little bit easier. So we're going to interact with a service. In this case, we're going to use Azure OpenAI, but you could use OpenAI as well. And for that service, we're going to create a client, and the client will have some options, especially like what deployment I am targeting, and you're going to set up a little bit of your assistant that way. Overall, we're going to be doing a chat, and the chat keeps chat messages, and we're going to be working with the chat in general. There are 4 or 5 roles that you will see interacting with the chat. The first one is the system. So the system, if you have seen it before, is how you set up your assistant. So basically, normally starts something like you're a helpful assistant that do this or that. It's pretty much setting up the the assistant to have a certain persona or personality. The user is the human interacting with the chat. The assistant is the chat response to whatever the user um, talked about. Then there are tools and functions and stuff. That's where we're going to start introducing our own function calling into the whole chat. So normally what happens is you have a request message that includes a role and a content. Um, it is important to notice that when you send a request message, you do need to include all the chat history, because these services, these clients are not really super smart. They need to know what you're talking about to continue a coherent conversation. So we're gonna see a little bit of that workflow in a second. And then the assistant or the service is gonna send you a response, and normally has some contents, but it's, for example, the assistant determines that a certain function need to be called, it will let you know. So it will give you some of those other indications of things that need to happen. So the flow normally goes like this. There is a user that is interacting with an app, and then they say, hey, hi there. What we're going to send to the Azure OpenAI service is actually two messages. Uh, First, the role is going to be system, and the content is you are a helpful assistant. So right there, I'm kind of setting up the 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 context for the service, and I'm gonna attach another message, which is what the user actually inputted. So it goes, even though it's the first message, it goes with two messages to the Azure service. I should say, here is a good opportunity to do any context setting that you want to do, and we will see some examples of that. So the service comes back with some response. How can I help? And that goes into the user, is presented to the user, and then maybe you say, hey, give me some ideas on attack for generative AI. Now, what I send to the service needs to contain all the history of the chat, so it can have context of what the conversation, how the conversation is going. Um, okay, so let me see quickly. It's hard to do this on my own, so I'm gonna check if there's any questions. Uh, All right, so Mild Other says, can you enlarge the screen? I will do that as I continue to share. All right, so let's my favorite thing, even though they're risky. Azure AI function calling, but on my main, I'm just setting up the basics. So let's go and see what's in here. So when this page gets initialized, I'm gonna get the endpoint and the API key from my configuration, and I'm gonna initiate an OpenAI client. So now on my API, I have what I needed. I'm gonna have a list of display messages, and um, basically I'm gonna iterate through all those messages. Depending of the role, I'm gonna show it a little bit differently. This is interesting because the message that comes back from the assistant has some line endings like this. So new lines. So this one just replace it for a BR. So that is the chat area. And then down here, I have the area where is the chat input, and I can either send the prompt and reset the chat. So I'll show you reset the chat quickly. It basically clears the prompt, any error messages that we may have, but it also clears out the history of messages. So that basically, as I mentioned, you really need the history to get started. So by deleting the the list of messages, you're pretty much starting anew and resetting the chat. The other option is to submit, so send the prompt, and I basically add the prompt to display messages for the user. So I added that to the message, and then with my API that I initiated, I'm gonna get the chat completion. We'll talk about the options in a second, but basically that's all you need. You get the response, and there is a message, and then you add it again. But this time, the chat role is an assistant. Let's see what the completions is. So in the completion, this is basically the completion options. It's you setting up your assistant, your configuration. So the deployment name is GPT-3.5, which is what I had on my service here. This is how my deployment is called. And then I am setting up my system. It's a helpful assistant that is obsessed with cookies and talks about them all the time. So that would just give you a sense of how you can manipulate the system to talk in a different way. Like I've seen crazy stuff, like people giving them like a persona that is English or Australian or maybe they're just saying you're not a helpful assistant, and you can have fun with that. But basically, that's what's gonna happen. And in the completion options, you're actually gonna send messages. So for each of the display messages that I have, I'm gonna add it to the set of messages that I'm gonna send to the service. So I want to put a stop point over there, and I'm just gonna run this. If while this runs, I'm gonna say if you get to the point where you download this on your app settings, make sure that you add some of this configuration. All right, so it's taking a little longer now that I'm on StreamYard for some reason. Let's see if it came up or not. No. All right, it didn't bring up the browser, but I'm just gonna do it. All right, so let's chat. I'm gonna say hi there. When I hit submit, I think this should have light up. So here's what I want you to know when, actually I didn't stop on the right place. Let's just do it over here before we return that. But now that we did it, hey assistant, and you can see right here, it starts talking about cookies, and I don't really want to know anything about cookies, but I'll just say, do you have recipes for cookies? And here, what I'm sending as a chat completion, I know this must be really, really small for people watching, but basically, this is what the options are. And if you go into messages, you can see that I am now sending 4 messages, and it continues to go that way. I'm looking into the response and what is the message, and it just goes and displays it in the chat. So that's a very, very simple implementation. You're basically sending the system configuration and the user prompt into the system, and then build a conversation that you keep sending so you get an accurate um, response. So the more context you send into the service, the less hallucinations you're gonna get. But you're gonna see that it really gets to hallucinate quite a bit. I'm gonna run this again quickly. Let's see if it brings it up. So eventually I'm gonna get to a point where I'm gonna want to say to my system, I'm gonna want to say, hey, can you get me some projects? So let me just do this and do it here. Reload. No? Oh, sorry about that. So I'm gonna say, hey, can you list my projects, please? So I'm gonna remove all this. I think we've seen this. So it actually went ahead and made up some projects. So this is what hallucination looks like. It thinks like it knows, so it goes and makes some stuff for you. But this is what we don't want. So I'm gonna switch for a minute to the slide, and we'll continue with the demo. So where we're gonna look now is into tools, and one of the tools that you give your assistant is functions. You can do also code interpreter. Knowledge retrieval is if you have some files you wanna give as context. But with the tools, you're allowed to build your own um, to declare your own functions. So, I guess that the things didn't, the transitions didn't work great here. But basically, the idea is that I would say, what projects do I have? And I set up my system. So my assistant, I add my function, my question, but then I add the tools that are going to help the assistant determine how to grab the information that he needs. That the assistant is going to say, hey, you actually need to call a function to figure out what projects does this user have. Notice I don't go to the user right away. I actually go back into the assistance once more, and send a response of whatever function I executed. It's important to notice that the service will send me an ID, like a tool ID, that I need to send back with my response. So they kind of close the loop. and then the assistant uses the response that I provided to create a nice language response to it. All right, so let's see the demo here. I'm gonna go back to Visual Studio, and I'm gonna change to local function calling. Continue to check out. Hopefully nothing big change there. I'll do that later. Maybe I cannot do it later. Boom. Accept merge. Let's see. So what is a tool definition? Basically, you can set up different type of tools, but in this case, we're going to do functions. So it's basically an object called function tool definition. I'll give it a name, a description. The description is important because you're going to send this to your assistant, and it needs to know, why would I use this for? And for getting projects, you actually don't have parameters, so that's fine. Now, the completion options, it's similar to what we had before. I'm setting up the system message, help employees fill out their timesheets. But now I'm saying, hey, there is a tool available for you, and it's defined here. And in the tool of choice, I'm going to say auto. This is the default anyway, but you could actually um, set it to the name of your function. Um, Everything else kind of remains the same. However, when I make the call to get chat completion async, before we just simply got the message, but now I'm gonna check what the finish reason is for the response. And if it tells me that I need to do to call a tool, and it tells me with the finish reason tool call, I'm actually gonna go. I need to add this to the options that I'm gonna send later, but I'm gonna go and process that tool call. And what I'm gonna do here is go to this function. Oops. Go to this function that if the function name, I don't know, if the function name is equal to what the system determined that I need to call, in this case, I'm just going to do like something. I am just making a list of projects. It's very static. But if you imagine here, you can do any type of function call, including an API call, which I will show in the next demo. But for this one, I just want to show you how, when it gets here, what it does and how it does it. You see if there is something running here. Nope. So I will run it again. All right, let's chat. So I'm gonna say hi. So no nonsense about cookies. Uh, um, show me my projects, please. It actually determined that I needed to do a function call. the function called what gets project. So it got into this if statement, and I'm just gonna return the projects as a string. I think I did a double click there, so it's gonna do it twice. But you can see here that it created some language around it, and everything worked great. Let's look a little bit of what happened in here. Show me projects. So you can use any type of language there. So the finish reason for so when I call the finish reason here, and it's gonna be hard to say, but it's just say, hey, tool calls. I need to call the tool. I'm gonna add it. I'm gonna add the response that I got to the history, and then I'm gonna process the call, and it becomes kind of like, you can say, it becomes kind of like a recurrent theme where now with all the options, I'm gonna call it again. I go to my function, and this time the finish reason should be stop. So basically, I'm done processing whatever functions we thought were necessary. All right, so that's nice. I'm kind of getting information from outside the chat and adding it here. So let's stop this, stop that, and I'm gonna then switch to API function call. All right, so fairly similar, but in this project, I have an API wrapper, and this kind of calls an HTTP client and gets the project or add projects to I actually want to stop there, to a project. So two things that I can do. If you remember from the Postman samples that I have, I can get projects or I can add hours to project, which kind of goes with IDs in data. So what's going to happen here on the call is that when I process chat to completion, it's going to be the same. But when I say get to response message, it's going to say if is gets project function, call the API wrapper get project. If it is add hours to projects, call this one, and some magic is going to happen on the arguments. But before we see that magic, let's see the definition of, so the definition of get projects remains the same, no parameters. The definitions of our to project is brand new. So this is the name, the description. This is all it needs to know. And then I define the parameters. I am going to need a project ID, hours, description, and entry date. All of those, three of those are required. And on my options, I now say, hey, you have two tools that you can use. You can use get project functions or add hours to project. So I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna run this and see what happens. Let me check the chat quickly. All right, so it is coming up. Oh, before we get too deep into this, I'm gonna show you a little problem that we're gonna have and how to solve it. So if we say, what is the current date? it kind of doesn't know how to get the date. It thinks that it needs an operator. Um, but actually this wasn't happening a minute ago. So let's just ask again, what is the current date? Let's see what response it got. The finished reason is tool calls. All right. It shouldn't be, but it is. Let's see, the function call was Python. Uh, yeah, it's not behaving. So one trick that I found is just to let you know what was happening maybe this morning. It would tell me that the date was sometime in 2022. So if you ever get that problem that is trying to determine the date and is in the past, what you can do is add it as part of the content of the context that you're setting for your system message. You can say the current date is this, and then it becomes a little bit smarter about it. Now you can say, what is the current date? And it has the context for that. Also, you can say what was yesterday, and it knows how to calculate that accordingly. So let me see if that works or if that's going to become a problem. What is the current date? Finish reason. Yeah, now it says stop. So it has all the information that it needs. What was yesterday? It has all the information that it needs to work with dates. Now, why is this important? It's important because on my tool definition, I have an entry date, and I need to be able to tell this assistant, hey, add some dates for today. So let's play a little bit with this. I'll go here and say what projects are available. Let me see if I can do this and if it works nice. This doesn't show very well. If I go like this, let's see what projects are available. Here it's gonna go and get the projects we know that happened before. It's going into the API. Now it's going again, but the finish reason should be stop because it already got what it needed. So the available projects are these three. Perfect. So now I'm going to say something like add 2 hours to Griffin for yesterday with the description demo please work. I'm going to submit that, and it should say yes, I need a call, and it should stop right here. But let's see. Yes. So the function call that it needs to call is add hours to project. This is the ID. Um, so I'm going to go into the function. And here is a little bit of magic that I want to share that I think is pretty cool. If you see the arguments, I'm going to see it here. Hopefully you can see them. There's no way to enlarge this, but it has the project ID 2, hours 2, description, and the date. So what did I actually ask? Griffin. So I said Griffin. It still was smart to know that the project ID was 2, and I said yesterday, and it was able to calculate it. So yeah, so I said yesterday. So in here, I can go and say, well, what I do now is just I'm inside my own function and I am manipulating everything to make my API call. So I just go and do a post. It's as simple as that. Uh, and once it comes back, because remember, the system has told us, hey, you need to do something. And now we've done it and told them we're done it. And it comes back to us and say, okay, there's nothing else to do, nothing more to do. You can stop now. And it tells me 2 hours have been successfully added to the Griffin project for yesterday. So it added a lot of language to my response of success. Um, I think I don't remember, but I think if I do this again, I think I included some validation so it wouldn't allow you to add two things. But let's see, let's try it. Now, because my service doesn't allow me to add duplicates for the same project and date, it came out with probably a 400, and it can't. So it kind of makes a little bit of language about it. Now, I could make that better by sending a better response. So I'm just sending the status code, but I could try to send it some other response. But one of the interesting things is that I am sending this string to it, and it was able to determine that it was an error. So that's a little bit about how you integrate your APIs into an assistant. So all that we have been doing really is creating an assistant that has some knowledge about external tools. In this scenario, the tools are functions, and it's able to determine when to call the functions. It's able to determine the arguments based on the context of the conversation, and and the execution of those functions is completely up to us. In this case, it's an API. And for the past 10, 15 years, we have been building APIs that are meant for other components or systems to consume, other code, really. But now we can consume it with natural language, which is great. I can go and say, get me my projects. It will get me my projects, and then add projects. It will add hours to projects, and it will do that. If I go back to my original base model that doesn't have any tool definition and say, hey, add some functions to Griffin, it's just going to hallucinate and make something up, or even tell me, no, I cannot do it. So that is for the demos. I'm gonna some of the lessons learned. I was talking with Alexia about how things broke yesterday. This is a demo that I had prepared last week, and things are changing very, very quickly. So be prepared to be patient. So the SDK and the model versions do make a difference. They're deprecating and introducing new things all the time. Um, think about optimizing your system prompts and functions, because you will be sending those in every request, and so having good prompts, good definitions is gonna save you money at the long run. I am a C# guy, that's why I make the demo with C Sharp Blazor, but I've noticed that documentation wise, it seems like Python is the first class citizen here. Let me show you something. When I go to when I go to, for example, do whatnot. So you go to examples only in Python. It used to have some C sharp stuff, even the old deprecated, only in Python. So if you know Python, I would think about creating your application on it. Although the library works great, but it just seems like there are more resources on Python. So some references, and I think Alexia has these around and can post them. But going to GitHub and see the actual package. So this is the NuGet package that I installed. Um, so I have it up here. So this is the NuGet package that I installed. It's called Azure AI OpenAI. It's still on beta, which is why I mean, like, it's in flux. Versions, you can see 11 days ago something changed. Um, so this is, but you can go to the GitHub repository, and one of the greatest resources that I found is under test, and then you go to samples, and here you can see the basic chat, the chat with tools, the chat with vision. So a lot of samples that will serve as good reference. All right, so we have 10 more minutes, and I will only use 5 of them showing you assistants. So if I go back to the studio, you can see basically what we've been working on is on the chat. And if you have a resource like this in Azure, you could also come here and play, right? And set up your assistant and whatnot. But you can also come and view the code. And again, Python first, go to C Sharp, and then you can go and play. Like, let's get this running on my machine. Like, I could have done this with console apps or whatever. Uh, but yeah, that's a good resource to have. Now, assistants are in preview. 3 weeks ago, I did not have access to this. You also have the code. Look at this, C Sharp. So it's similar, but now you have an assistant ID. So what are assistants? Like, in my point of view, assistants are simply pre-configured chat options. So all those chat options that I set up on code for the system. So instructions here, this will become the system message. The system name is so you can call it. What deployment are you using? And then you can set up functions. So instead of setting it on the code and setting it and sending them in with each with each request, you basically have them preset uh, in the studio, and by calling your assistant ID, then then you don't need to worry about sending all those extra tools configurations. You just send the messages back and forward. So this is gonna save a lot of time. It's something that already existed in other platforms, but in here, it's just coming into preview, and it's gonna I think make some of the other options obsolete. but in a way, it's good that you know what the basics are. So when you get this abstraction over that, you know exactly what it's doing. So in here, you can add one or multiple functions. There is a code interpreter as a as a tool as well, and you can add some files that will allow you to provide more context to the assistant. But once you have the assistant and save it, then you will be able to, if you look here, it will give you an ID for that particular assistant ID. And then instead of creating an open um, AI client, you will create an assistant client. And initially, you're just gonna do endpoints, but eventually you're gonna call in your assistant ID. So it's gonna be similar idea, similar concept, but a lot of the work that we did to keep the chat options are gonna be saved on the server basically. And that is assistant. I think that's it. Sorry I couldn't keep up with the chat, uh, but let me know if you have any questions. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want the presentation or some or direct link to the repository. And Alexia, that's it for me. I know you have some additional comments to make. Thank
Yeah.
you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for this great session, Ricardo. Yeah, I can give a few more minutes for folks to ask their questions in the chat if there are any. And in the meantime, for the audience, feel free to scan this QR code, which will take you to our survey link. Our feedback is greatly appreciated. The event code is 22092. And yeah, that's about it for me as well. If there are no more questions in the chat, I think we can end it here. Once again, Ricardo, thank you so much for this session today.
All right.
Hoping to have you again very soon at the reactor.
All right. Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone.